Hello guys, Ancient Gameplays, I'm Fabio Pisco and welcome to my channel, and today we're gonna test a 2017 discrete GPU versus a 2024 integrated GPU. The 2017 discrete GPU is an RX 580 8GB, and this was the best price performance card that we had for several years straight, of course in different price brackets across the years, but it was one of the best price performance cards that we could get in 2017, 2018 and sometimes even in 2019, because I believe that the RX 5700 XT was released in 2020 or in the end of 2019. But nonetheless, this card started as a GTX 1060 competitor, the GTX 1060 6GB, sometimes in some games even losing to the GTX 1060 3GB, and then it started getting better over time, surpassing the GTX 1060 6GB in terms of performance. And with this said, we now have the Ryzen 7 8700G that features the Radeon 780M. And the point is, we are in 2024 and the integrated graphics evolved quite a lot, now with the 8700G being the fastest CPU that we can get for now, with Strix-F coming in the end of the year, with RDNA 3.5 and 2 more compute units than this one. But still, can the best 2024 APU integrated graphics match or surpass the 2017 discrete GPU graphics, now matching a GTX 1070? That's what this video is for. But before, today's video sponsor is GVG Mall, bringing you all the software deals you need, like Windows 10, Windows 11, Office 2021 with a new Windows 11 design, and even Windows Server 2022. For all of these, you can use my SKG discount code for 25% off, getting a Windows 10 serial key for only $16. Then use the key on your Windows settings and you'll have an activated system. Let's finally go to the benchmarks once again. RX 580 8GB versus the Radeon 780 with the same CPU, in this case the 8700G APU. Starting with Avatar Frontiers of Pandora using FSR, because this game is actually quite heavy, the old RX 580 leads us to around 40 average FPS at low settings, and surprisingly, the Radeon 780M is not far behind, delivering 37 on average as soon as we overclock. As we activate frame generation as well, yes, because the RX 580 is not officially supported, but most developers will use it of course, we have the RX 580 being considerably better, and I suppose that's because of having more asynchronous computing power, being in this case 24% faster stock versus stock and 17% faster OC versus OC. Plague Tale Requiem is a quite heavy game, but one thing that I could notice when testing several cards along the way is that this game works considerably better with newer GPU architectures, and maybe that's why the Radeon 780M is so close to the RX 580 here. As soon as I apply the FSR mod, since this game only supports the LSS officially, the scales get maintained, with the RX 580 being only 14% faster stock versus stock and 7% faster OC versus OC. Microsoft Flight Simulator is another title that surprised me quite a lot. This game usually loves raw power, so I believed the RX 580 would be much better here. But for my surprise, it was actually the opposite, with the Radeon 780M being slightly slower at stock versus stock, but 3% faster OC versus OC, which is remarkable for an integrated graphics. Moving to Cyberpunk 2077, I saw some people commenting in my previous community post that although Microsoft Flight Simulator was running better on the Radeon 780M, the RX 580 would be better in many other games like this one. Yes, again. Here we have both cards being virtually on par, as the Radeon 780M features RDNA 3 architecture that performs quite well in this game engine. Also, the lower 1% lows you see here are mostly because my motherboard seems to not be able to give more than 4GB VRAM to the Radeon 780M, which is a bummer. Although as soon as we enable the frame generation mod from LookFZ that you can see in the video link in the top right corner, things kind of shift a bit, with the Radeon 780M now having more consistent 1% lows and being basically on par with the RX 580 across the board. Very nice results. Spider-Man Remastered is another interesting title, as Spider-Man 2 will be released on the same game engine, and as we can see here, the RX 580 is indeed the faster card, although delivering almost the same 1% lows as the Radeon 780M, but being 14% faster stock versus stock and 8% faster OC versus OC. Starfield though is the first game where we can see the Radeon 780M completely smashing the RX 580, and that might be due to some newer instructions or better efficiency of the RDNA 3 ARC, as the Radeon 780M is now 18% faster stock versus stock and OC versus OC, which is an outstanding result for an integrated GPU. And the same applies when using frame generation, where the Radeon 780M just delivers a much more enjoyable experience since it has considerably higher base frame rates as well, being 23% faster here, OC versus OC. And The Last of Us is another scenario where the Radeon 780M is still better. Even though the RX 580 has more raw power per se, it still loses to the integrated GPU that is 11% faster if we compare the best results versus best results. Regarding overclocking, the RX 580 got worse results here somehow, and I believe that may be due to the OC settings not being functioning properly as they should with the newer drivers, as the performance uplift only appears in some games, which is in fact off. As soon as we enable FSR, the differences get even more eye-catching, as the Radeon 780M is delivering close to 60 average FPS, delivering kind of an okay experience, while the RX 580 is barely managing to hit 44, being around 32% slower when comparing once again the best scores from each GPU. Now with Alan Wake 2, well, you can see there are no results for the RX 580 because the game simply wouldn't run. It crashed every single time. And even when you run it, it will run at like 2 or 3 FPS like shown in YouTube videos, like this one from MGX Benchmarks. So it's kind of unplayable here. As for the Radeon 780M, it could run the game indeed. It ran like crap for sure, but at least it ran, unlike the RX 580. Counter-Strike 2 was officially released around half a year ago, let's say, and uses a Source 2 engine, and it seems that once again the Radeon 780M takes the lead, being 7% faster stock versus stock and 12% faster OC versus OC. And let me tell you that this game ran quite nice on both cards, even at very high settings, which is definitely something that the budget gamers will like to see, I guess. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 is one of those titles that loves raw power, and that's one of the reasons why AMD cards tend to be better in this game, but it also loves the dual issue LAUs on the RDNA 3 cards. And I guess that's why the Radeon 780M is once again on par with the RX 580 here, which is once again very interesting for the budget players that are still able to play this game at over 60 average FPS even with an old GPU like the RX 580 or a recent integrated graphics like the Radeon 780M. Although as we move to Resident Evil 4 that uses the RE engine, we see the first big win of the RX 580 over the Radeon 780M, where it is 34% faster stock versus stock and 30% faster OC versus OC. It seems like this game really likes the additional physical units of the RX 580 and doesn't really care much about newer architectures. Well, at least not as much as the other games like Starfield or The Last of Us, and this is actually interesting to see if you ask me. And the same happens with PUBG that uses Unreal Engine 4, and really haven't been tweaked for quite some time, let's say that. Here the RX 580 is over 32% faster, making a big difference gameplay-wise for PUBG players, as they go from a bit over 60 average FPS to almost 90, which once again makes a big difference gameplay-wise. But as we move to Fortnite that uses Unreal Engine 5, the tables turn, and now the Radeon 780M is indeed the best performer, being 9% faster stock versus stock, but 18% faster OC versus OC, which in this game makes no difference for the RX 580 somehow. Still, the Radeon 780M does an outstanding job here, delivering over 60 average FPS using Nanite as well. And surprise surprise, we have another Unreal Engine 5 title, Robocop, and once again the Radeon 780M is the best performer, being once again very close to the 60 average FPS mark, while the RX 580 was barely touching 47 in the best run. And it really seems that the little iGPU runs better in newer game engines, better at least than the RX 580 of course, maybe due to newer instructions, architectural improvements, who knows, but it does run better. As we move to The Witcher 3 that uses CD Projekt's own engine called Red Engine, In here, the Radeon 780M just gets demolished by the RX 580, that is now around 55% faster, which is a massive difference for Witcher 3 players that will be much happier with an RX 580. As we enable FSR though, the Radeon 780M can still deliver decent results of up to 75 average FPS, and while the RX 580 is still considerably faster, the difference got reduced from 55% to 40% OC versus OC, which is still a massive win for the RX 580 of course. For people playing The Witcher 3, the 580 is definitely the way to go. And to finalize, we have the 20 games average, and I did not include Alan Wake 2 since the game didn't actually run on the RX 580, and even then we have the RX 580 being barely 5% faster than the Radeon 780M that was on par in most titles, faster in others, and considerably slower in other games like Resident Evil 4, The Witcher 3 and PUBG. Which in the end makes the little Radeon 780M a match to the mighty RX 580 that was one of the best price performance cards for several years straight. Let's move to the conclusion. Let me just give you a look at the shirt that my girlfriend actually offered me in Valentine's Day. I don't know if you can see it. Let me just show it to you. The face that she put on the shirt. Yeah, it's basically a face that I have on this thumbnail, and she made a shirt out of it for me to train in the gym or kickboxing or so on. I mean, it's... I just wanted you guys to see. And well, as you saw, the results show it all. Well, the RX 580 is considerably faster in some titles, but it is also slower in others, and in others it doesn't even run. Like Alan Wake 2, it will run at 2 or 3 FPS when it runs, because most times it will just crash the desktop and won't even launch the game. So yeah, and even without counting Alan Wake 2, we had around 5%, within 5% of the performance of the RX 580 with integrated graphics with the Radeon 780M, which once again the whole package of CPU plus GPU is around 100-110 watts when overclocked. And when overclocking the RX 580, we alone on the RX 580 have around 160 watts. So the RX 580 alone consumes more power than the 8700G CPU plus GPU. And this shows us once again how far the integrated graphics have come, because we have an APU consuming less than half the power of the RX 588 GB, and at the same time it performs better in newer titles, in some newer titles, and overall in the 20 games average it performs more or less on par, within 5% of the RX 580 performance, once again while consuming much less power. And we can argue that, of course, the RX 580 can be overclocked further. You can push the RX 580 in some cases to 1500 MHz instead of the 1400 MHz, because it wasn't really a huge overclock. It's a really mild overclock. But the same applies to the 8700G integrated graphics, the 780M. The same applies there, because the overclock there was also mild, with around 150-200 MHz increase with Curve Optimizer. So it's not that much actually. It was generally it was around 150 MHz over the stock, so both configurations could go higher indeed, with the 580 going up at least to 1450 MHz, 1450 MHz, and the Radeon 780M could go higher with better RAM frequencies. I'm running 6000 MHz, which is basically the middle term, let's say that, but you can go, let's say, as high as 7000 MHz. The APUs can indeed use those frequencies, and will use those frequencies especially for the APU, because the APU uses the RAM as VRAM. So the higher the RAM frequency you have, the higher the VRAM frequency you'll have on the APU as well. Hence, while RAM frequency matters a lot, especially for the APUs. If we could just use, let's say, 6400 MHz, 6800 MHz, 7000 MHz, or sometimes a bit higher than that, the APU, I guarantee you that the APU would have at least a 15% performance increase. While I can almost guarantee you that the 580 wouldn't have more than 10% increase in most scenarios. Okay, in most scenarios, in some it would, but in most scenarios it wouldn't. As, once again, if I push the RAM frequencies on the 780M integrated graphics, it would easily easily go up to 20% if I used, for example, 7000 MHz RAM. If I used over than that, well, the performance would increase further, as usually the APUs are bandwidth starved. So as soon as you increase the VRAM frequencies, the bandwidth gets higher and the performance gets higher as well. So it would be interesting, and that will come in another video. But for now, as we saw, integrated graphics came a long way, and in terms of performance, it is more or less on par with the RX 588GB, unlike some of you said in some comments that I've read before, especially on the 50 games that I tested with the 8700G and integrated graphics 780M. Some of you said that, well, it's better to just get an RX 470, or better to just get a used RX 580 because it will be much faster. No, it isn't much faster. Maybe it is much faster in some scenarios, but in others the 780 is faster as well. So it's a trade-off. As for price points, of course, that you can get a lower tier CPU with a better GPU, and overall your performance will be better. You can get, for example, an i3 12100F, like Hardware Unbox showed, and you can get an RX 6600 for roughly the same price. And once again, the 6600 will obviously be much, and I repeat, much faster. On the other hand, the RX 580, well, costs $50 and it performs more or less the same. And the 8700G APU once again costs $329, is much more expensive. But on the other hand, comparing to the 12100F build, you have a way better processor and you are not buying a dead socket. On the 12100F you're basically buying a dead socket. You can upgrade later to a better CPU as well, but you'll be limited. For example, on the AM5 you can buy now the 8600G or even the 8700G. It will cost you more for sure, but in terms of CPU power, you'll have a much more powerful CPU, and if you're into AI and those things, you also have an NPU inside, and once again, the 780M inside the APU, well, will consume way less power than those cards, and at the same time, it will perform more or less on par with the 580. So it's a trade-off. If you want your build to be future-proof, well, you have a better CPU now, and you can later just get a new GPU and call it a day. And later, if you want to upgrade to a way better CPU, you have the option to do it, because the 8700G is already much better than the 12100F, definitely much better. But if you want to upgrade for that, you can get, for example, a 7800X 3D. You'll be able to get an 8000 series CPU as well. You'll be able to get an 8000 series CPU X 3D as well, and you'll most likely be able to get a 9000 series APU as well. So your motherboard will last you way longer. So with the 8700G you're getting a better CPU and a slower GPU now, but in the end of the road you won't have to change once again your motherboard and your RAM kit, because you're already running DDR5 and your motherboard will last you at least for 2 or 3 more generation CPUs. So it's a win-win situation for me if, once again, if you are looking in the future. If you just want to play right now, well, you can get a Ryzen 5 5600 on AM4, and once again the 6600, or you can get the 12100F and the 6600 once again. And right now, in terms of gaming performance right now, it will be much faster, hands down. But if you're looking to, let's say, in half a year or 1 year, just get a beefier GPU, the 8700G will still do its job, because in some scenarios it will be, for example, on par with the 7600X, in others slightly slower, depends on the game, but still faster than the 5600, faster than the 5700X, only being beaten by the 5700X 3D and 5800X 3D in the AM4 socket, but once again, on a newer socket, AM5 and with DDR5. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe and share this video. Leave a comment in the comment section. Let me know, and I'm always looking there, because that's where the build is, the APU build is. But let me just know in the comment section what you think about the performance. If you were actually impressed by the 780M, because I definitely was. And I will do more testing once again with higher RAM frequencies to see where I can get this performance going. And by the end of the year we'll get a new APU, Strix Halo, with once again RDNA 3.5, which is an improved RDNA 3, and 2 more compute units, and that APU will be even better. So I'm really eager to see what AMD is bringing now in terms of APU performance, because for budget gamers, the 8600G, not the 8700G, is the best way to go. An A620, cheap DDR5 6000, because it is cheap right now, 32GB, and an 8600G, and you can, well, you can play the games you want mostly. You can play Fortnite at 1080p, of course, you can play PUBG, you can play some other games as well, so you're good to go. And later, once again, you can just upgrade to a new GPU as well, and still have a decent CPU. Now, really finalizing, thank you for watching, guys, and see you in the next video. And don't forget, leave a comment in the comment section. I really want to know what you think about this topic. Cheers!